Hi, and welcome to Marketing Optimization with Alex Designs. I'm your host, Alex Harris, and today we're talking with Samuel Hulick. How you doing, Samuel?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
Awesome. He writes a great blog at useronboard.com, all about designing for results. And we're going to be talking all today about onboarding and creating that experience when you first want people to actually activate and use your product. To get started, Samuel, I want to ask, what is your definition of optimization and why is it beneficial?
Sure. My definition of optimization is the scientific approach of aligning whatever your assumptions are regarding your design with the reality of how they're being used iteratively for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, the assumptions is the key part, because you take into all this guesswork to really figure out, how to iterate in the right way. And unless you're kind of really have a methodical way of doing it, like you said, you're not optimizing it in the right way. So a lot of people probably don't know what the term onboarding really means. They probably know, funnels or sales funnels, getting people in. Let's give people a little bit of background about what onboarding really is.
Sure. So my definition of onboarding is the process of making it more likely that new users will become successful when they're adopting your product. So that can really differ greatly from people who, think that onboarding might be putting in, a clickable tooltip in their product or something like that, that you're really sowing those seeds of adoption earlier on when people are trying to understand what your product even does. And then later on when you're creating habitual use long after the first run experience is over. That
process that you go through, I guess a lot of people can do it pretty differently, but what would you say the common steps would be in, a classic onboarding process?
Sure. Well, I would say, if you're looking at a classic funnel or, pirate metrics, it's kind of end to end. You're looking at introducing yourself and just orienting people around what the value that you provide is. If that's misaligned from the beginning, no set of tooltips or wizards afterwards is going to really save you from that. Mm-hmm. So you can really do a lot of legwork early on. Another thing that's kind of commonly referred to as like the aha moment when somebody starts using your product. I really try to front load that as much as possible so people have the aha moment before they even get started with it, because you'll have that many more people on board or, ready to go. Then you kind of go through a process that typically I would call, just basically the sign up process, entering in your information, creating an account. Some company or products, before you actually get into the app, in between the sign up process is kind of a customization wizard at times, or it kind of looks like a modal without a site behind it. Netflix is a company that does that quite a lot. And those I kind of call like limbo screens. After you initially get into the product, then you're dealing with the first run experience, which is basically a curated experience of getting people up to speed within the application, introduced to what it does and where to go to do things within it. At the end of the first run experience, then you're also looking at generating habitual use. So that can often be achieved through lifecycle emails and things along those lines, up until the point where people are coming to your site unprompted and are using it successfully.
Yeah, I don't think people, well, me as a web designer, I know because I create these experiences, but maybe as marketers, people don't realize how important this process really is, because not only do you have to have a great design and a good, experience to get to actually activate and use it and come back, that first impression really is so important, because if people don't easily understand your web app or how to use your website or get to the right areas, and that's the right place for them to be, then they get confused and probably never come back.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at, typically 50 to 60% of the people who go through the entire marketing funnel and finally they reach the point where yes, we got them, they signed up, and they don't even come back a second time. Yeah. So it's pretty sobering when you look at the conversion rates.
Yeah. Yeah, and that plays into all the metrics that are pretty important: lifetime value, frequency of use, and anything you can really think of.
Customer support's another really big one. That if you're optimizing, just for revenue, you're looking at man hours and salaries for people to be, providing support, and how many of those tickets are open in the first 30 days or during the first experience to begin with. So there's that overhead as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because you're front loading a lot of those answers ahead of time that you can have people not have to ask you later. That's definitely very key. One of probably the most popular examples that people are probably familiar with that has an onboarding process through a website is Netflix. And you did a really good teardown on your site where you analyze how Netflix follows through this process. So let's take a look at how Netflix onboards its new users.
All right, sounds like a plan. So we start things out just with a sort of a 1,000-foot view of the entire process. People typically start at the homepage. I think is a pretty safe assumption. I tend to do that when I'm doing these teardowns just because I'm not really aware of different areas where people might be entering into the onboarding process, although that's certainly possible. But coming to the homepage, then moving into, once they decide to sign up, there's the start trial and setting up process are kind of two sides of the same coin. And then once they land in the actual application, getting started and personalizing it.
Yeah, they've gone through a bunch of different iterations of this whole onboarding funnel process. And now, I guess because me as a Netflix owner, I don't even get DVDs anymore. I just get the streaming portions of it. So, adding the DVDs is essentially an upsell of the $7.99 unlimited DVDs portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen different companies doing this type of thing with the personalization? Because I know once a user is actually invested in a type of company, they're more likely to go ahead and finish that conversion. Have you seen many companies kind of following the same process?
Yep, for sure. Quora is one that immediately comes to mind. They have you, Tumblr as well. They'll have you go through and start following other people, so you're making those kind of personal connections with different information sources, and then you're also obviously just generating your activity feed. So once that's up and running, Twitter does a very similar thing. Instead of having you produce something right on the fly, since they used to be a lot more heavy onto all right, you have an account, tweet something, and people didn't really know what to do, but they could think of like 10 people to follow or something along those lines. So once you start following other people, every time you come back, there's new content. You don't have to be the driver to create that. Kind of solves the cold start problem in that regard, and also customizes it completely. So as far as like you're saying, getting people to feel more invested, that's totally the case. There does seem to be a trend right now of having really, really Spartan homepages. If you look at Netflix's homepage or Twitter's or things like that, it's really, really, really stripped down. A lot of times just like an image, logo, sign up. And I think that works if you're a household name. Mm-hmm. But if you are a company that people haven't heard of, you really need to provide some sort of rationale for people getting started. Outside of they read about you in the Wall Street Journal and all their friends are using you or something like that. So that's one thing that I would notice. I would really, obviously whatever experiments you run can bear out what works and what doesn't, but I wouldn't recommend going really, really stripped down by default.
Yeah, that's a great point. Don't assume that people are going to know who you are, even though you're because you're a startup and no one knows who you are. Twitter and Netflix and Evernote, they can do that type of thing. I think it's really interesting how the web has moved towards more personalization, because not only are they creating an experience for you to kind of customize it yourself for that experience, but they're collecting qualitative data about you as well, so they can make further changes down the road. Is this kind of the way the web is going?
It certainly seems to be. Yeah. It's really fascinating. I mean, the things that Netflix is doing, and I remember reading an article where someone reverse engineered all the different categories that they had, and it was something like 390,000 or something like that. It's a very, very interesting branch of, I guess, computer science meets customer insights, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
As far as having, if you're a startup, bootstrapped or things along those lines, if you're early stage, I'm not sure, you'll have the data to be able to make some groundbreaking discoveries in that regard, but it's super, super interesting for sure.
So let's talk about some general designing for results type of stuff. If someone were to be wanting to create their own, SaaS product or information product, where would you kind of start to really figure out how to create an onboarding process for an individual?
Sure. If you have a product, I mean, first of all, the assumption would be that the product itself makes people successful in a particular way. So getting really, really clear on what are the very strong indicators of what a thriving user looks like versus one who might be struggling or might be lost. So coming up with some sort of KPIs for user vitality is one thing that I would really recommend. Using that as the launch pad, and then sort of just reverse engineering how to create those people, along the way. So one thing I like to recommend is just imagining yourself being present in the room with them in the place of your website, and just thinking about how would you go about setting them up. For example, if you have email marketing software, what are the things that you would do to help them become better email marketers? And then basically, once you have that sort of script in place, look to have your website, replace you in that regard.
And if you're doing this for, a potential client or a product, do you recommend kind of doing everything in black and white first, and you kind of figure out how to, the pages kind of flow together, and, showing that? Do you kind of get involved in that process?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like storyboarding out a customer journey is concerned,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah, yeah, big time. My general recommendation is to really look at what I call touch points, which are anytime somebody comes in contact with something that either your product or something relating to your product. So that could be your homepage, your pricing page, your sign up flow, your confirm email or email confirmation message. Or even like a Google ad that might start the whole journey, and basically mapping out all of those and looking for things like, is there thematic consistency and sense of information that's going from one to the other to the other? If you have a Google ad that talks about one aspect of your product that points to a landing page that expands upon it, and then the landing page just dumps people into your homepage, you're kind of losing that sense of information. So looking at having that narrative consistency from one touch point to the other, and also making sure that those touch points are propelling people forward to the future ones.
Yeah. Where I think the issues that I deal with a lot, or, I do analytics, heat maps, really figure out where people are clicking on, but it's hard to really figure out some of the motivations to get people to kind of push through certain sections. Have you figured out, maybe a way to, not necessarily survey the audience, but figure out what their frustrations are to get them to kind of complete a process?
Sure. I mean, that kind of goes to the qualitative versus quantitative methods of investigation, right? So, looking at if you have the data and you're not sure why it is the way that it is, then you would want to skew, harder to the qualitative side of things. Having either in the moment surveys or things like that, I think can be really helpful. Also slicing and dicing by segments and understanding maybe it's a bug that's only affecting Firefox users on Windows or something like that. But ultimately, kind of a shorthand for that is just really sitting down and looking at each individual touch point and saying, what is the user really trying to accomplish? And is this really relevant and moving them forward? A lot of times you just can't get, kind of like I was talking before, like if somebody thought your product did one thing and, they were oriented around that and that wasn't really relevant to what your product actually does, none of those touch points are going to really work for them. You can't make them more effective if they're not relevant to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, that relevancy is certainly key. And you touched on it, even getting involved in the actual advertisement that they're clicking on to ensure that you're bringing over the right users. Because I know that many companies, they just spray and pray with their advertising without targeting the individual users to ensure that.
Yeah, big time. And it's also a question of measuring through the entire funnel.
Yeah.
That if you set up an AdWords goal of creating signups, for example, you could be looking at keywords that are just totally kicking ass for you that flame out as soon as they get into past the sign up process, because then people are like, oh no, this isn't what I wanted after all.
Yeah.
So you're spending all this money on things that are just turfing out pretty much immediately. So looking at what are the AdWords, keywords, SEO campaigns that are not only generating a lot of early activity, but actually seeing it through to the ultimate conversions. If you are a SaaS company, who becomes customers that stick around for 3 months, things along those lines.
Yeah. I think it's key to go ahead and map out everything, because you're going to have to continue to iterate, but figuring out what that core map is initially, obviously your goals and what those micro conversions are, you can kind of design around that whole experience.
Yep. And also, if you're looking at conversion rates from one to the other, then you're also able to identify what the leakiest bucket is. So yeah, it gives you a really strong idea of where you should even be, applying your design resources first.
Yeah. Do you have any additional advice that you want to share for people who are kind of considering, how they should set up their onboarding process in general?
Yeah, spend as much face time with your customers as possible.
Yeah.
If you can offer live chat, I mean, it's kind of a cliche term at this point, but like doing things that don't scale, the sort of insights that you get, not only are you helping that individual customer at a really critical moment in their discovery of your product, but you're also able to take those learned findings, roll them into the product, and scale those out to people who wouldn't have bothered chatting with you or things like that. So getting as much face time as possible is something I really, really recommend. And then as far as like tactically areas to really experiment rapidly, I would recommend looking at lifecycle emails. That's something that a lot of times you don't have to fight a real turf war over those like you might have to with a homepage or something like that. Generally, they're kind of considered a little bit of an afterthought, but they're kind of a lightweight thing that you can go in and you can really see a clear, did this result in a spike of activity when it gets sent out on the third day versus the first day, things like that.
Yeah. So those autoresponder emails, as soon as you collect the lead, kind of have a nurture campaign that seeds out over series of time.
Yeah, or ideally not even just drip. I mean, I think a lot of companies look at a drip campaign and it'll be triggered on sign up and it'll send something out that day and then 15 days later saying, hey, don't forget to start paying us. And then 25 days say, hey, your trial's ending, don't forget to pay us. And then, hey, your trial ended, don't forget to pay us. And not really actually coaching people through to finding success within your product, just kind of nagging people to become customers, which I don't think is really the most reliable way to go about that. So really looking to align your lifecycle emails around how far are people getting in, especially on that first experience, and where are people getting stuck on their way to go from first-time user kind of kicking the tires to actually, being, like I mentioned before, high vitality, thriving kind of a user. And how can those lifecycle emails push people forward incrementally? And then tying that back to the activity of just looking, when we send out this email with this subject line, does it result in people coming in and doing that particular activity? Yes or no?
I think that's some great advice. I think that consistency really pays into the experience that, you're providing a whole bunch of value, not necessarily pushing them to make the sale, but providing value first is, the core message I think I heard there. So you're writing a book all about this user onboarding. So tell us a little bit about the upcoming book.
Oh, the upcoming book, yeah. So it's basically a primer for user onboarding. I do a lot of onboarding consulting, and I wanted to create something that would not exactly be my consulting rate, but would provide a lot of information that I would really want to get established right away for most of my consulting projects anyway. So it's kind of what I'm calling a primer. But it's basically looking at that end-to-end customer journey that we've been talking about, starting with an advertisement, ending with somebody becoming a paying customer, or if you're not, if you don't charge, then a high-frequency user of the product and things along those lines. So basically, how can you make sure that you're nailing that transition and creating that change in people's behavior and making sure they sustain it?
Great. Let's close by telling people how they can find out more about you.
Sure. So probably the best place is useronboard.com. It's like user onboarding, but that was taken, so I took off the ing. And then also on Twitter, I'm at Samuel Hulick, SamuelHulick.
Great. Thanks, Samuel. Thanks for your time. Thank you for watching the Marketing Optimization Podcast with Alex Designs. Please remember to subscribe to all the videos in my YouTube channel. Thank you.